Good morning, everyone. The world is noisier than it's ever been. There is less silence now than ever before in human history. Up until probably about 100 years ago, a lot of human beings were farmers or were at least in small towns or rural villages. And in that landscape, solitude and silence were just built into the fabric of your life. If you were a farmer, you were probably alone in a field for 10 hours a day with no AirPod, no radio, no voices, no noise. And for me, there are very few times now where I do nothing. I remember as a child being bored, being in silence way more than I am now. Staring out of a window on the bus with nothing else to do. Whereas now, I think it's possible to completely banish silence and stillness from my life and have some kind of noise going on the whole time. Even when we're alone, we're with our phones, messaging someone, watching Netflix, replying to emails, Googling something, listening to podcasts, listening to music. There's always some noise or distraction to give our attention to. According to 2023 research from Data Reportal, the average screen time for users around the world ages 16 to 64 across different devices and platforms is, can anyone guess? I want to hear you at Battersea and Westside shout out if you know the amount of time people spend on their devices. Per day, the average screen time is 6 hours, 37 minutes per day. Congratulations to you if you got near that. Users in the UK spend an average of 2 hours, 55 minutes per day on their desktops and 2 hours, 52 minutes per day on their mobiles. And no shame here, but do you know which nationality in the world has the most screen time? South Africans account for the most global screen time, spending a daily total of 9 hours, 27 minutes on their devices. And while many of us admit we're tired, busy, and overbooked, it's hard to swim against the current of our culture. London is anything but a city of stillness. I wonder what this is doing to our relationship with God and to our relationship with ourselves. So we're in the middle of in a series looking at prayer, and it's just not this one-dimensional transaction. It's an invitation to know the living God. And we're looking at these 3 different aspects of prayer: talking with, listening to, and this week we're going to dive deeper into being with. And so would you journey with us at Westside and at Battersea as well? Would you journey with us this morning? And in the room as well, and those online, as we delve a little bit deeper into this. I heard some really great stories this week just from your life groups, and some of your life groups as you've been sharing about your own prayer lives with one another. Someone said to me this week, it's so good to hear about how other people pray. I've been so inspired. And so if you haven't done already, do check out our prayer page on the website, vineyard61.org/prayer, and join in the morning, noon, and evening rhythms that we're going to try and do all together as a community. Psalm 46 is attributed to the sons of Korah. And they were basically David's crew who gathered for night and day prayer in the tabernacle. And so from that community come these famous words: be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. You remember Kelsey talked a couple of weeks ago about prayer being the ultimate way to know God and be known by him. And I think there's a clue in this verse. Be still and know that I am God. Be still. And then there's an invitation then to know God. Now, that sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But if you're anything like me, being still and just being with God is really, really hard. I felt God inviting me to and reminding me about silence and solitude for probably about 8 or 9 years now, but I still feel like a learner. Almost came with an L plate this morning just to demonstrate that. But so please don't hear me this morning and think, oh, Viv's got this all sorted. This is hard for me. Someone with my kind of personality. I thrive around people. I love information. I love to achieve and organise loads of different things. This silence malarkey doesn't come easy. And if I do find myself in times of stillness, I find my mind pinging off in 1,000 different directions. I get distracted by every little thing. Anyone remember the film Up? Remember the dog in the film Up? Squirrel? You know, that is me. And I rarely think, oh, great, well done, Viv. That was such a successful time of silence. Well done. And yet, times when I do this regularly, when I do take time to stop and be still, over time, and I want to emphasize that, over time, I feel more connected to God, my anxiety levels decrease, my sleep improves, my reactivity decreases, and I start to feel as though I'm more grounded and centered. Over time. I heard this true story on a podcast recently of author Sue Monk Kidd, who was visiting a monastery in order to slow down and retreat from some of the noise in her life. But she was struggling to still the chaos in her mind. And she then noticed a monk sitting underneath the tree on this quiet midwinter morning, and this perfect picture of peace. He had a beanie pulled low down over his ears to keep warm. And she approaches him and says, "You're so still and quiet. How can you just wait? Wait on God and wait on your own healing. How can you just wait so patiently in the moment? I just can't get used to the idea of doing nothing." And he broke into a wonderful grin. And he said, "Well, there's the problem. Right there, young lady. You've brought into the cultural myth that when you're waiting, you're doing nothing." Then he took his hands and placed them on her shoulders, peered straight into her eyes, and said, "I hope you'll hear what I'm about to tell you, right the way down to the bottom of your toes. When you're waiting, you're not doing nothing. You're doing the most important something there is. You're allowing your soul to grow up. If you can't wait, you can't become what God created you to be." I love that phrase, you're allowing your soul to grow up. Being with God, it feels very different from talking with or listening to. It's less like work and more like rest. There's a great quote from New Testament theologian Robert Mulholland, and he says, "It's the deep inner posture of a joyful release of our life and being to God in absolute trust, without demands, without conditions, and without reservation. It's neither a passive resignation nor a fatalistic acquiescence to whatever comes. It's rather a consistent posture of actively turning our whole being to God so that God's presence, purpose, and power can be released through our lives into all situations." It's just God. Here I am, I'm yours. It's an act of surrender to love. Being with God is less something that we do and more something that God does in us. Ultimately, being with God in silence is resting in God's love. Listen to Paul's prayer for the church in Ephesus, Ephesians 3, verses 16 to 19. "I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." This type of prayer is just resting in and receiving the gift of his love for us. We are beloved sons and daughters of our Father. And then we offer that love back to God in worship. This is our lifeline. John Mark Comer says, slow down. Remember who God really is. Remember who you really are. That's prayer. I don't know about you, but you can kind of gauge the level of intimacy with somebody as to how comfortable you are in silence with them, can't you? Early on in relationships, there's a lot of words and there's activity, and that's good. But as you get closer, you carry on doing all of that, but you also desire to be more at ease in one another's company and to rest together. And that's the invitation to be with God, to be in his presence and to rest. I often like to imagine that I'm just resting back in my Father's arms and just held. And to be honest, it's such a relief to not have to feel as though I have to hold everything together, but just take some time to relax and let him be God again and let him remind me that I'm loved. It's going to be okay. He's got me. And it's such a lifeline. It's been such a lifeline for me while Steve's been ill and there's been a million things to juggle. To lie back, to surrender to love, to surrender to him holding everything together instead of me. Such a relief. I don't know about you, but I long to do the things that Jesus did. But the thing is that doesn't just include the signs and the wonders and the miracles. Jesus himself embraced solitude and silence. His public ministry began only after a period of silence and solitude in the wilderness, where for 40 days he resisted every lure the enemy threw at him. And for those of you who are uncomfortable in the quiet, I'm not sure this was a picnic for Jesus either. A barren desert and the devil are not the spiritual retreat that most of us imagine. And I imagine that Jesus emerged from that probably more physically exhausted than when he began. And yet those 40 days alone launched 3 years of public ministry that changed the world and bridged the gap between the earthly and the heavenly. Jesus chose silence and solitude when he was overwhelmed or exhausted. During these moments, he pulled away from the crowds and leaned into the quiet for intimate moments with the Father. And we see him intentionally moving back and forth in activity for the Father and then pulling back to be alone with him. He calls his whole disciples first to be with him, and then he sends them out to preach. The night before Jesus was crucified, having just shared the bread and the wine with his inner circle, Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane feeling the weight of what was to come. And I imagine with knots in his stomach and sorrow pressing in, you imagine him with his knees in the dirt, probably his forehead pressed down to the ground, just being silent and still before his Father. And the words he offered broke the silence with a plea and a surrender. If it's possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. 3 times the Son of God uttered this prayer alone in the garden. And in the moments that followed, he was arrested. He was led away to be whipped and beaten and stripped naked until his body was finally mercilessly hung on a wooden cross. And Jesus' silence and solitude was followed by suffering, which isn't incredibly comforting to us. But we cannot miss here that every time Jesus stepped away, God the Father met him. Not always with words or a shift in circumstance, but with his presence. The quiet became a place of communion, a necessary pause for what came next. Author and writer Sarah E. Westfall says that we too need that time away, not in the name of pampering, but of preparation. We need space to wrestle with our humanity, remember who we are, and reattach our souls to the Father. Surrender is born out of the silence, And solitude gives nourishment so that love can deepen and grow. And only then can we give from the best of us rather than what's left of us. Only then can we embrace a life of connection where the deepest recesses of our soul echo the words of Jesus, yet not as I will, but as you will. You see, a life of presence requires a measured absence. And in the quiet, we both lose ourselves and find a way. And just a quick aside that this isn't like Buddhism or mindfulness. It's not just having a void in your mind. It's becoming present to God. He's always there, but sometimes we just need to become aware. It's giving space for him instead of drowning him out with noise. He longs for us sheep to hear his voice, but if there's too much noise going on, we can't hear him. And we don't give him space to remember who he is and remember who we are. Jesus pulled away from the crowds and leaned into the quiet for intimate moments with the Father. How much more do we need to do this? I need to do this. How much more? Okay, I hear you say, Viv, I'm convinced. You've taught me into this, I'm in. I hear you at Battersea, I hear you at Westside going, yes, Viv, I'm in. Come on. Tell me how on earth I can get started in this. Well, funny you should say. Create a ritual. This is the first thing. Create a ritual. And this daily rhythm that we're inviting all of us to do as a church is to pause at midday. Maybe set an alarm to remind you to stop in the middle of your day. Choose an ordinary place to become sacred. Ordinary holy ground. That could be your favourite chair. It could be a bench in a park. It could be a window seat on the bus. It could even be a toilet at home or at work. Sit up straight with 2 feet planted firmly on the ground. Lay your hands in your lap, palms open, facing up. Close your eyes, breathe in deeply and exhale. Pray something simple and invitational. And traditionally, this is called a breath prayer. And it could be anything like, here I am, Lord. Or come, Holy Spirit. Or Lord, have mercy. For me, I often repeat the phrase, I'm held by God in love. And then be quiet. Be still. Wait. I suggest setting a timer on your watch or your phone. Do put your phone on airplane mode for this time, but put the timer on. And when you set a timer, it just keeps you from needing to open your eyes to check how long's gone, you know? If you've never before done this, then start with 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. Do this every day. Or if you're feeling daring, go for 5 minutes. It's only 5 minutes, guys. Just 5 minutes of silence. Resist the urge to decide if this practice of silent prayer is working. Don't evaluate if you're getting anything out of it. Simply trust that the practice of a couple of centuries worth of saints and the practice of Jesus may have a place in your life too. Practice silence as a sacrificial offering to God. It's that simple. It's about giving something of yourself to God, not getting something from God. And one day you'll look up and discover that somewhere along the way, at a point you probably can't name precisely, silent prayer became a lifeline, an essential. It all sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? 5 minutes of silence, I can do that. But it's not. You will face 3 major challenges: distraction, hurry, and fear. First is distraction. The moment you begin to sit in loving attention with God without words, your brain will start to jump all over the place. It doesn't mean that you're bad at it. It just means you're human. You have a mind, your mind is jumpy and distractible, and that is a normal and natural part of your brain's inner workings. And it can be calmed and quieted with practice over time, but distraction will never fully go away. The key to quieting distractions is not to give them a second thought. Literally, when they come, not if they come, when they come, just bring your mind back to God. The moment you realize you've been distracted, just come back to God. Maybe just repeat the phrase that you have. Just repeat that over and over again. Thomas Keating writes about if your mind gets distracted 1,000 times in 10 minutes of prayer, that's 1,000 opportunities to come back to God. And I love that perspective. I love that so much grace within that. Okay, secondly, you will have to face hurry to be with God in this kind of way. You must, as Dallas Willard once said, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. But to do so, it will force you and me to confront our impatience and how quickly we get bored. Henry Nouwen once called prayer wasting time on God. And he didn't actually mean it's a waste of time. He just meant that in our productivity-obsessed culture, where time is money and money is God, and entertainment and stimulation fill every crevice of our lives, to give God our time and loving attention for him to do or not to do as he pleases is wasteful in the eyes of our culture. But like the story in John's Gospel of Mary pouring out the expensive perfume on Jesus' feet, it's an act of love and worship. And it's the only fitting response to the beauty of who Jesus is. Hanan said at the women's prayer night recently, we have to learn how to be before we do. Our doing can't exceed our being. Jesus, first of all, called the disciples to be with him, and then he sent them out to preach. And if our inner being is full of chaos, everything we do becomes chaotic. Because that's what's happening inside of us. Remember, the main thing that we get out of prayer isn't necessarily different life outcomes. It's God himself. This is the aim, isn't it? That we would know God and be known by him. That's the aim. If those two challenges weren't enough to overcome, sorry for all the good news, you'll probably get present to some fear. Once we reduce distractions and slow down, the third thing that we face in silence is fear. Whatever is down in us will come up to the surface in prayer. Desire for God or lack of desire for God, love, hate, anger, insecurity, envy, jealousy, shame, hurt, regret, guilt. All the inner turmoil and tension we carry in our body will come up in the quiet as we're still. As we're still, we become more and more aware of how we've been using distraction, hurry, noise, work, food, entertainment, shopping, 1,000 different cultural narcotics to run from our pain. And now all of that pain is in you and me, and it's probably likely to be leaking out in all sorts of unhealthy ways. I don't know if you know whether you leak or not. I dare you to ask people that you live with or your close friends whether you're leaking at all. You know, how do you respond at the end of a busy, stressful day? How do you respond if you don't get your way? How do you treat your family or your housemates? These questions aren't meant to shame anyone. They're to help us all realize that we are all in the same boat. We have stuff that gets bottled up, and at some point, if we don't bring it to the proper place with God, then it will leak out. In silence, we create space for it to come up in a healthy way and for us to offer it to God to heal. And that's scary for a lot of people. But this is why we need to encounter God. He may show us things, but it's in order to heal us, not to shame us. But if you stay with silent prayer long enough, you'll move through that inner turmoil to a kind of surrender, freedom, and inner peace. John Mark Comer says, stop playing God over your own life for a moment. Release control. Return to the created order. Be still. Prayer begins there. Hear this invitation from Jesus to us all today. I love this in Mark 6, verse 31. He says, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. I think we all need this more than ever. I need this more than ever. Hopefully you would have got a card on your chairs which you're welcome to take away with you, and it might just help you prompt you sort of how to do this in your daily life. But in a moment, we're just going to try 2 minutes of silence together. Apparently stats show that it gets awkward in church after 15 seconds of silence, but as Steve is often known to say, the awesome is in the awkward. And so shall we practice this together now? Are we up for this? Okay. So sit up straight. 2 feet planted on the ground. Maybe lay your hands in your laps. Palms facing up. Close your eyes. And breathe in deeply. And exhale slowly. And again, breathe in deeply and exhale slowly. And you might just want to have a phrase that you want to use. And it might be, here I am, Lord, or come, Holy Spirit, or hallelujah, or I'm held by God in love. And let God embrace you with his love during this time. We're going to start the 2-minute silence before handing straight back to Westside and Battersea after this. There's going to be a short sound to signal the beginning and the end. Let's begin. In this silence, God has many wonderful gifts for us. In the words of Psalm 33, we wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. May your unfailing love Rest upon us, O Lord, even as we put our hope in you.